The speech I'm going to give today, I came up with many years ago, and it's been altered since, but I was asked once to come and speak at the Moving Wall, Vietnam Memorial that goes around. I came up with a talk for that time, and I've since altered it a little. Today, by the way, if you haven't figured it out, is the 40th anniversary tomorrow of the Vietnam Memorial being opened in Washington. So I call my talk The Wall for a reason you'll see. So I want to talk today about the Vietnam veteran. Not any particular Vietnam veteran. I could talk about the soldiers I lost in Vietnam: Max Pugmire, Rodney Collins, Ronald Westfall, Albert Wayman, and Brian McCarthy. I could talk about my classmate, Carmen DiCabellis, who died in Vietnam. But today I'm going to talk about the image of the Vietnam veteran and how it's changed over time. In 1991, I was the commander of the 110th Public Affairs Detachment of the Rhode Island National Guard. Our job was to produce news stories on the soldiers in the National Guard. One of my missions that year was to cover the homecoming of the Rhode Island Guardsmen who served in the Gulf War. I must tell you that I honestly had mixed feelings watching the tremendous reception given our troops as they arrived at Westover Air Force Base. The crowds of well-wishers, the music, the cheering, all gave me a great feeling of pride. I was relieved to see everyone come home safe and unharmed. On the other hand, I could not help thinking of my own homecoming now 52 years ago. I was met by my mother and father. No bands, no music, no well-wishers. But that was enough for me. I don't think any of us who served in Vietnam expected bands and parades. That isn't why we went. We went for the most part because we were brought up by men like my father and his friends who had served their country in their wars because they felt it was their duty. They had taught us in their own way that when your country calls, you answer. Well, something happened to the Vietnam veteran. Somehow the war that was lost was confused with the warriors who fought it. In the eyes of the media and much of the public, all Vietnam veterans were nothing but drug-crazed baby killers. In the 70s, it seemed like every TV show had a story about a Vietnam vet who killed his wife or robbed the local gas station or shot up his hometown. The newspaper articles began with Vietnam vet robs store or Vietnam vet accused of hit and run. I never saw World War II vet rob store or Korean War vet accused of hit and run. If they weren't shunned altogether, Vietnam vets were ignored or even mocked for fighting in an unpopular war. Then things began to change. In 1982, the Vietnam Memorial, the Wall, was dedicated in Washington. The nation realized that it had treated its Vietnam vets poorly, to say the least. All of a sudden, it was okay to be a Vietnam vet. In fact, there were people who never went to Vietnam now claiming to be Vietnam vets. There were parades and reunions in Washington and Chicago welcoming us home. We were no longer baby killers and drug addicts. No. Now we are all heroes. Well, in fact, we're not all baby killers, and we're not all heroes. We were just men and women who were called to serve our country, just as our fathers had and uncles had been called. We did our duty and came home. We didn't and still don't expect any special treatment. We just want to be remembered as men and women who did our duty just like our fathers did. I also served in Afghanistan and Iraq. Today, veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq are treated differently than we were when we came home. Returning home from Afghanistan 18 years ago, I had people come up to me in the airport and thank me for my service. Far different than my return from Vietnam. Today, the public gives veterans the respect and honor they deserve. I think the American people have finally learned to separate the war from the warrior. Today's veterans should thank all Vietnam veterans for that. I'd like to close with a quotation from a book called The Only War We Had, A Platoon Leader's Journal of Vietnam by Michael Lee Lanning. A war is a major event in a man's life. It was popular among many who fought to say that Vietnam wasn't much of a war, but it was the only one we had. I can only add that it was enough of a war for me, for I'm neither old nor young enough to want to experience another one. I am proud to have served in Vietnam. I feel no guilt, have no regrets, harbor no memories I can't cope with. And except for a few terrifying moments and many young men resting for eternity under neat rows of military headstones, I change nothing. What I do feel is satisfaction and pride in doing what had to be done and standing up when called upon by my country and being prepared to die if necessary. I think this is a sentiment shared by all veterans, no matter which war they served in. I think that sentiment that those here would agree. Thank you.